This week we're going to talk about our memory. This is really kind of part two of effective studying. If you understand how your memory works, it allows you to study more effectively. One of the most common things that I have heard as a math instructor over the last 16 years is something akin to, I understood it in class, but when I tried it at home, it didn't make any sense. And I often hear this from students who don't take any notes, who just kind of sit in class and watch and like, hey, that looks easy. I'll be able to do that no problem later. But simply seeing and understanding something in class doesn't transfer that information into your long-term memory. When you go to a movie and watch the movie, you remember bits and pieces of the movie, but you don't remember the whole movie and everything that happened. And the same is going to be true for a math class. And a math class is a little bit more involved often than most movies too. So it's a little bit more complex information that you're trying to remember. And then not only are you trying to remember that information, but you're trying to remember how to apply that information to solve problems, which can get difficult. So we need to find ways to transfer our knowledge into long-term memory. Active listening and taking good notes help with that process in the classroom. Another thing that's true is remember that your instructors were hired to teach you math because they're good at it. They will naturally make it look easy on the board because it is pretty easy for them. So don't judge that as meaning that it is therefore going to be easy for you. You're learning it for the first time. They were through that process years ago. For example, for me with algebra, I learned algebra about 35 years ago now. So I've been doing it for 35 years. It's a very second nature thing to me. But when I first learned it, I had a lot of problems with it. There were things I got wrong. I had to learn from mistakes, various things. My instructor made it look easy, but it wasn't necessarily easy for me. So it takes more than just simply watching it. And even understanding it while you're watching it, it takes practice. So our short-term memory is what is processing most of the information that we see in class. This is part of why we take notes, because notes create a record that will last longer than our short-term memory does. Some of the information is entering our long-term memory, but it's not all of it, so it's a little bit disjointed, and it hasn't really been reinforced, so it's easy to forget. It's probably going to stay in our long-term memory longer than it would have in our short-term memory, but again, we still need to reinforce it to help keep it there. We have to find ways to continually reinforce our long-term memories to help make them stick and make them easier to access. That's part of why people who are good at playing an instrument get good at it, is they practice and practice and practice, and their skills become part of their long-term memory. Athletes practice and practice and practice, and those skills become their long-term memory to the point where they don't even think about these things anymore. They become natural. But it's practicing and reinforcing things and getting them to stick into long-term memory that's really important. This is ultimately learning. It's more than just simply memorizing something, because we can memorize things on the short-term basis and not really ever learn them. I'm sure you've used that trick before for taking tests and things. But we want to learn. We want this stuff to stick around for a while. So to create long-term memories, we need to organize the information. We need to think about the information. We need to connect new information to old information. We need to understand information. We need to figure out how to use the information, practice with it. There are a whole bunch of different things that help to reinforce the memories. And the more different ways in which we use and think about new information, the more reinforcing we're doing of those long-term memories. Reading the textbook, being an active learner, taking good notes, those are all aspects of creating long-term memories. Continuing to rework your notes, rereading the textbook, going through the process of doing your homework and trying it again, those activities help to reinforce and create long-term memories. Studying regularly for short periods of time, reviewing regularly for short periods of time, instead of once in a while for long periods of time, also help to create long-term memories. The shorter the time span in which you do all this stuff, the stronger the memory becomes. That's why we continue to encourage you to work as quickly after class with homework and notes and things like that, because it's going to help reinforce those long-term memories. You're not giving them as much time to begin to fade away. All right, so we want to do things before class, during class, after class. We want to continue to work things. If you can do a little bit of math every single day, that will help you a lot more than doing a lot of math once every week or two. Even once something is beginning to stick into our long-term memory, it's not always easy to get it back out again if we haven't reinforced it enough. All right. One of the ways to think about this, at least one of the ways I like to think about this, is walking through the woods. If you walk through the woods once and then turn around and try to retrace your steps, it's not very easy. But if you follow the same path through the woods over and over again, you eventually start to wear that path down. And it gets easier and easier to see it. It gets easier and easier to travel along it without losing your way, without taking side trips and things like that. And that is somewhat analogous to the way our long-term memory works. The more often we use and access a long-term memory, the better we wear down that path, so it's easier to find that path and traverse it again later. So our last 3 slides here are just going to be some tips for helping you get knowledge and learning into your long-term memory. Minimizing the things that distract you when you're studying helps a lot. So that's a good idea. Again, it's those things that distract you. Taking breaks when you are getting frustrated or you feel your concentration slipping is good. If you're just getting tired, you're not going to be doing yourself much good in terms of moving information into long-term memory. One of the most powerful things you can do is translate what you're learning into your own words, connecting it to things you already know and using a language that works for you. You want to make sure that you're not saying things incorrectly when you do that, that what you're doing in the language you're using is still correct. But if it's a more personal language, that will help strengthen your memories. It will also help to interconnect things because, again, you're using a language that is common to you and common to other things you know. You want to try to understand things before you memorize them. Simply trying to memorize things you don't understand is a difficult thing to do. If you ever tried to memorize a list of words or terms that you didn't understand what they referred to or what they had in common, it's really difficult to do. In math classes, rote memorization is seldom useful alone because you have to apply the knowledge. Just simply having memorized a formula doesn't do you any good if you don't know how to use the formula and when to use the formula. You want to be selective in what you learn, and by that I mean that you want to try to organize and group things into the smallest number of categories possible so that you are having to remember the fewest number of things possible that still allow you to do everything that you need to do. If you see a homework assignment with 50 problems as 50 different problems, then that's an awful lot of memorizing to do. But if you see a homework assignment with 50 problems as 10 groups of 5 problems, where each group of 5 problems are very similar, now you've gone from 50 things to memorize how to do to 10 things. All right. If you can break it down further and get it to 5 groups of 10 problems, then you've gone even further. All right. In other words, we sometimes call this trying to condense our knowledge. And creating pictures in your mind is really powerful. All right. The Pythagorean theorem is something that applies to right triangles, and it's a good idea to try to get yourself to think every time you hear Pythagorean theorem, a picture of a triangle, potentially even labeled with information from the Pythagorean theorem, or maybe just the Pythagorean theorem itself. All right. Think about what these things mean. See if you can create mental images. Those things help us remember. Mnemonic devices can be really useful. There are things called acronyms, which basically usually take the first letter from a bunch of words. The example here, PEMDAS or PEMDAS, stands for parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. An acrostic is where we replace the words we need to memorize with other words that start with the same letter, and then create kind of a silly phrase out of it. PEMDAS can also be considered as please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. There we still see the PEMDAS. And rhymes are also really useful mnemonic devices. One way to remember that division by 0 is an undefined operation is the silly little rhyme, 0 under D line is undefined. All right, you can make these things up yourself. You can look for them on the internet. If these are the types of things that help you, great. They don't help everybody though, so be careful. Make sure you're finding things that work for you. Don't be afraid to use your voice. Don't be afraid to say things out loud. You're getting an extra sense involved. Your hearing as well as your sight and your voice and things. The more senses that you can get involved in your learning, the more powerful your learning is. Finally, use note cards, use graphic organizers, use summary sheets, use whatever works for you to organize information, to rewrite it, and to provide you ways to study it, to see it, to work with it, and to get it moved into your long-term memory.